Wonderful. Thank you. All right. We're on the sound checks. I just want to point this out that we are having a few internet connectivity issues in our office today. And my colleague did warn me of this before I started. He just tried to do a webinar and it kept cutting out. And I did actually lose my connection whilst we were waiting to join. So I will say, if the webinar suddenly cuts out, that's probably what's going to have happened. So I just advise you to sit tight. I don't think it booted you guys out, just me. So just sit tight and I will log back in and restart the webinar. So if that happens, don't get too worried. I'm kind of expecting it, but hopefully, fingers crossed, that's not going to happen. So welcome to all of our new joiners and to all of our regulars who attend these every week. We are going to be discussing cleaning data in Excel today. And as always, I know you're probably bored of this if you attend these every week, but I will just introduce myself very briefly for any new people that we have on the call. So my name is Deborah Ashby and I'm an IT trainer and Microsoft subject matter expert. And I am the trainer here at Filtered and Excel with Business. I also work with Skillsology as well, depending on where you're joining us from. I've been in the IT industry for about 24 years now, very long time, and just over 10 years in IT training. And my focus is mainly Microsoft products, although I do occasionally train other things. And it's my role really to keep all of our Microsoft portfolio up to date. So I look after all of our Microsoft courses, I run webinars, write blogs, all of those kinds of fun things. So yes, that's me, for those of you who haven't spoken to me before. Now, the subject that we're covering today, I'm going to jump straight into the agenda. And it's a reasonably short session today. I'm not sure if this is going to last the entire hour. It is quite quick to run through. So I am going to provide you with some materials at the end. You'll get those over the next couple of days, which will really help you to practice some of the skills that we're learning today yourself. So you'll have some of those blank workbooks to have a little play around with. So I'll make sure that those get out to you at the end of the session. But the agenda for today, I'm just going to start out talking a little bit about why it's important to clean your data in Excel. You might have some kind of idea, maybe you do a little bit of data cleaning here and there, but hopefully you're going to pick up some tools and techniques today which are really going to help you when it comes to sorting out your data. It is a really, really important step which a lot of people tend to overlook or try and take shortcuts on, and it really just, it makes more work for you in the long run if you're not cleaning your data before you start doing things like charts, pivot tables, or anything really that kind of hangs off of that core central data that you're using. So we'll talk a little bit about why it's important. We'll then jump into some examples, and I've got two examples for you today. One is a spreadsheet which I use fairly frequently, so it might be quite familiar to some of you. And we're going to run through some basic tools and techniques such as removing blank rows all in one go, how to search for duplicate values and remove those, and also how to format your data correctly using number formatting and various different formats. That's going to be the first example, and I'm going to run through that, and then I'm just going to show you how to quickly put it into a pivot table as a little added bonus, because to me that's kind of like the natural progression. Once you've cleaned your data, you're probably going to want to do something with that data, so I thought it might be quite nice just to show you how to quickly create a very basic pivot table as well, so a little added extra for you there. The second example I'm going to be using is slightly different. This time I'm going to be taking some data that's imported. So this is a fairly common scenario. So a lot of the time you might not be working on data that you've created yourself. It might be data that you've received from someone else, data that you downloaded maybe from a database or something along those lines. So you want to know, it doesn't always come into Excel in the perfect format. So I'm going to run through an example of importing a text file in, and then how we can go about separating the fields and cleaning that data up. So we're really going to focus a lot on using text functions to clean up your data in the latter part of the session. So that would be things like, as we've got on the agenda, proper, upper, and lower, which are all functions for changing the case. We're going to use functions like len, left, and right, and also a function called trim, which will help you remove any unwanted spaces. And we're also going to take a quick look at the substitute function and also how you can use find and replace. So that's pretty much what we're going to run through. And as I said, I will give you some, send you some practice files at the end so you can have a play around with it yourself. How does that sound, everyone? Type into the chat panel if that sounds okay. Are you excited? Jonathan's put, if you have time, can you do some VLOOKUP in formulas? Jonathan, I would love to do a VLOOKUP. It's one of my favorite subjects. Probably won't be doing it this session because I haven't prepared for that, but we can do it in another session. We do have a VLOOKUP session available on our YouTube channel. It's an old recorded webinar. Again, at the end of the session, I will give you the links to our YouTube channel so you can look at any of those historic recordings as well. But unfortunately, we don't have time to go through VLOOKUP today. Everybody else seems good? All right, fabulous. Okay, let's jump into talking about why it's important to clean your data. Well, these reasons are probably fairly obvious. If you don't clean up your data, your results will not be correct if the data that you start with is not in the correct format. So if you have a spreadsheet and it's full of blank cells, blank rows, maybe inconsistent case, inconsistent formatting, if you then try and create anything off of that, it's just going to look wrong and not particularly great. So that's the first reason why it's important to clean your data. Data is hard to read if it's not consistent, extremely hard to read. Again, if you've got a whole spreadsheet full of inconsistent case and things like that, it's not consistent and it doesn't look good and it's very difficult for people to read. So again, that's another reason why it's quite important to clean your data. And as I mentioned previously, if you've got anything hanging off of that data, so things like pivot tables, charts, or anything else that uses that data, it's probably not going to display correctly and you might start getting some weird results. So very, very important to start cleaning your data. And again, some of the things which you might want to clean out of your data would be things like misspelled words. So very important to get rid of those. Things like trailing spaces. Sometimes they're quite hard to spot. You don't notice that you've got a blank space at the end of a word. So knowing how to clean up all of the trailing spaces, that's a good function to know. How to get rid of unwanted prefixes, improper cases, non-printing characters, all of those things. If you leave them in, it creates a really bad first impression for anyone that you're sending that spreadsheet to. So we want to make sure that when we're sending something out, it looks perfect. So I hope you're all ready to roll up your sleeves because it's time for some spring cleaning of our worksheets using some Excel functions. All right. Let's jump out of there and we're going to go to my first example, which I have hiding somewhere, just here. There we go. And let me just zoom out slightly because that's a little bit large. All right, so this is the first data set that I'm going to be using. It's a very basic data set and it's basically just some sales figures. So we have a date in column A and you can see our dates look pretty odd at the moment, so we're going to have to deal with those. I have the branch in column B, I have the value in column C, and I have the department in column D. And you can probably see immediately some things which don't look quite right. Now, I will say this is quite a contrived worksheet. This is one that I've just kind of added errors into just to be able to show you some of these things. In the next example, it will be a little bit more realistic because we are going to import some data, but just so you know, this is kind of a bit contrived. What we have here, we have quite a lot of data. Now, if you want to jump down to the bottom row of your data in Excel, if you press Control and down arrow, that will jump you all the way down to your last row of data. So I can see that I have quite a lot of data in here. I've got just over 34,000 rows. And if I do Control up, it's going to jump me back up. Now notice it doesn't jump me all the way back up to the top. It jumps me up to where there's a break in that data. So where I have those weird blank rows, it's only jumped me up to that first one. So I would have to keep pressing Control up and it's a little bit tedious when you do it like that, but just so you're aware that that's what it does. All right, shall we start dealing with some of these issues that we have in here? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of those blank rows. I don't need them. I don't want them in there. They're going to cause me problems. If my intention is to create a pivot table after this, which it is, if I've got blank rows, that's really going to throw my pivot table off. So I want to make sure that all of those blank rows are gone. Now, I have quite a large data set here, and if I was to go through highlighting each row individually by holding down my control key and then deleting, that's going to be pretty tedious if I've got a lot of rows. So there is a utility in Excel which will do it all for you. So all you need to do is highlight your data. So I'm just going to drag across to highlight my columns. I'm going to stay on the home ribbon, and if you cast your eyes all the way over to the right hand side, we have a find and select option at the end, and the option that you're looking for is go to special. And you can see in Go To Special, it gives us the option to select numerous different things. Now, what I want, fairly obviously, is the one here that says blanks. And I'm going to click OK. Now, depending on how large your data is, really determines how long it's going to take Excel to find those blank rows. Mine's been pretty quick today, I will say that. Normally when I do this, it takes quite a while for it to search through 35,000 rows of data. It's actually been quite quick today, so that's good. And you can see that it's highlighted those blank rows. And if I scroll down, you'll see it's highlighted them all the way down. Now that I've got them all highlighted, I can safely delete them. So again, I'm going to stay on my home ribbon on the right-hand side in the cells group, and I'm going to click the drop down, and I have delete sheet rows in there. So as easy as that. Really nice, quick efficiency tip for you there, quickly removing those blank rows. All right, what else do we have to do? We've got a few other things in here. Now let's deal with column A first of all. We've got dates in here, but these don't look like dates to me. They just look like regular numbers. And I've explained this before in numerous webinars, but I'm sure a lot of the people on the call today maybe haven't attended some of our previous webinars. Just to explain to you why this happens. Dates in Excel are basically just numbers, okay? And the way that Excel calculates a date is it takes everything from a date of the 1st of the 1st, 1900. So that date is basically day 0 for Excel, okay? So the 2nd of the 1st would be what it would call day 2. Okay, so the number that you're seeing represented here is basically the number of days after the 1st of the 1st, 1900, according to Excel. Okay, so that's what it is when you see a date represented as a numeric value, which is fine. All we need to do here is we've just got the wrong formatting applied to this column. So if you look up on the home ribbon again, in the number group in the middle, you can see here it says general. That's not the number format that we want. We want to highlight our column A, and we want to make sure we have it set as a date, whichever one you prefer, but I'm going to go with short date just to make that correct. And you can see it's converted those numbers very nicely to the short date format. All right, looking across, column B actually looks all right to me. I'm fairly happy with how that looks. What about column C, the value? Again, if I highlight that column, these don't really look quite how I want them to look. And if I look again in my number formatting area, I can see that I've got general formatting applied. Now, actually, these are values. I want to show these as currency. So I'm going to show them like so. So they now have their dollar value next to them. And then finally, I have in column D, I have all of these different departments. And I can see here that there are some inconsistencies in the way that these are laid out. And again, if I was going to do something like a pivot table, it's really not going to know how to handle all of these differences very well. So you're going to have some problems with your pivot table. So this is where you want to start looking at different text functions in order to be able to help you clean all of this up. So what I like to do, I'm going to deal with this in a few separate stages, is I'm going to start by dealing with the case. So I can see here I have some inconsistencies in case. I really want them all to look like these ones down here. So this is how I want it to look. And this is what we call proper case. And it means that the first letter of the word is capitalized only. Okay, so I can see here in D2, that's not quite correct. I've got some weird spaces in D3. I've got all caps in D10. So I want to make these consistent. Now there is a function that you can use, which I'm just going to put into E2, and that is called proper. And what that will do is it will change everything to proper case, okay? It's a really simple little function. You just type proper, and then you can see underneath the argument is text. So you just have to tell it, what text do you want me to convert to proper case? So I'm going to say D2, and close my bracket, and then I'm going to hit enter. And you can see what it's done there. If you compare it over here, it's done that correctly. And I can double click my little cross, my fill down cross, and it will fill all of those down. Now, it hasn't affected these weird spaces, but you'll see that it has put everything into proper case. Incidentally, if you didn't want it in proper, there might be situations where you want everything in uppercase. You have an upper function, which is pretty much exactly the same. Oops, like so. And you also have a lower function in there as well. Really useful little functions to know. Okay, so just be aware of those. Now, what else do I have to deal with here? Well, I have these odd spaces at the start of these words, and there is another function that will remove what we call erroneous spaces. So that would be trailing spaces, leading spaces, also double spaces as well. So if you have a word and maybe it's got 2 spaces in the middle, it will reduce that down to 1. And that function is called trim. So if I do it in F2, and again, really simple little functions these are, like so. Now, it's not going to affect that one too much because it didn't have any spaces, but if I drag down a little bit, you'll see for these ones that do have strange spaces, it has fixed those. Now, whilst it has fixed those, again, it hasn't changed my cases. So what I really need to do is combine proper and trim together in order to get my text looking how I want. So I'm just going to delete that out, and I'm going to go back to my function just here. And this is where you can combine 2 functions together. So I've got my proper, and all I'm going to do is add onto the front, trim, like so. And that's going to do both of those functions in one. It's going to change it to proper case, and it's also going to trim those erroneous spaces. And because I've done it all in one, it means I don't have to add additional columns in. Oh, now, can you see what I've done here? I always like it when this comes up because I always forget this. I forgot to put a closing bracket on the end. Can you see there? It's saying we found a typo in your formula and tried to correct it, and it's added that extra parentheses for me. So I could just accept that correction by doing yes. Always remember, you must close off as many brackets as you open, okay? And as you can see there, I'm not very good at doing that. I always forget. Fortunately, Excel will correct it for me. And then I can double click to fill down. And you can see now we have really nice, tidied up text, and I can just add a title in there. Fairly straightforward, simple little text functions and some techniques that you can use that are really, really easy. However, what do we have now? We have 2 columns that are pretty much the same. We have 2 department columns. So what people generally tend to do is once they've got their tidy data in column E, they think, right, I'll just go in and I'll delete out column D. And this happens. They get an error. Why am I getting that error? Type into the chat panel if you know. Why am I getting an error? You can just type it into the chat panel if you know. Someone's put, you deleted the source. Exactly right, I deleted the source. So if I just undo, you'll see here, because I'm using a formula that refers to whatever's in column D, when I remove column D, the formula doesn't know what to do because I've deleted that part of the formula. Yes. Everyone stay calm. Okay. Great. All right, let's carry on. Again, I apologize if it keeps happening. There's not too much I can do about it. It's internet issues in our building today. All right, let's carry on. So as I was saying, or as somebody rightly pointed out, when we delete column D, it means we're deleting part of this formula. So it's not going to work. So there's a couple of ways that we could deal with this. The first way is I could take column E, I could right click and I could copy it, and I could paste it over the top of column D. But instead of just doing a regular paste, a Control V, if I go to my paste options by clicking the lower half of the paste button, if I click paste values, what that's going to do is it basically just pastes what you see on the screen, so the text, and throws away the underlying formulas. So if you look now, when I click on cell D2, if you look in the formula bar, there's no formula there, it's just saying the word breads. So I could then safely go in and delete column E like so. So I could do that. Now I'm going to show you in the next example an alternative way, because sometimes you don't want to delete work that you've done. Sometimes it's good to keep those intermediate steps so you can see exactly what formulas you've used throughout the process. So I'm going to show you an alternative way in the next example. But if you don't particularly care to see what formulas you use to clean up the data, then it's perfectly fine to do a copy and a paste values to get that data pasted correctly. Does that sound okay to everyone? Is everyone with me so far? I know there's lots of questions coming in. If you can hold them off till the end, that would be great, because it's just quite hard to go through them whilst I'm in the training. All good? Lovely. All right, someone's put, I dropped off, but I'm back on now. Thanks, Mohammed. I know, I think we all did. I'm sorry. I hope you meant you dropped off the internet and not dropped off as in fell asleep. Hopefully it's not that boring. All right, that's the basic example. Now what I'm going to do, now I've got my data looking all nice, is I'm going to go a step further, and I'm going to do something I always do when I am working with data, and I would advise that you do this as well, and that is to put my data in a table. And I do this regardless of whether I'm about to create a pivot table or a chart or do any further analysis on the data, because I just find it helps me a lot when it comes to updating my data or doing any formulas that come off of my data. So I always like to put my data in a table. And I always say this to people. People say, well, isn't the data already in a table? And I think people assume that because Excel, you know, really does look like a table. It's a grid structure made of rows and columns. It's not actually a table, it's just a grid structure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of my data. So I'm just clicking anywhere in my data, pressing Control A to highlight the entire lot. And again, on the home ribbon in the middle here in the styles group, we have a format as table option. And you can choose any one of these. Let's choose this one. And Excel's saying to me, where is the data for your table? And you can see it's picked up my range, which is great. And I've also got headers in my table, which is also picked up. So I'm going to say, yes, my table does have headers. And I'm going to click on OK. And now my data is in a table. How can I tell it's in a table? Well, when I click in it, if I glance my eyes up to the top of the screen, you can now see that I have a Table Tools contextual ribbon, which has tabs running off of that, and all of those tabs control various different elements and formatting that I can do with this table. Now you might be thinking, well, what is the point of putting it in a table? There's lots of good reasons, and the biggest one really is when it comes to updating. And you'll see, I'll do a quick pivot table and then I'll show you sort of how having this in a table makes your life a lot easier. So let's very quickly, as a little added extra, I'll just quickly show you how you can then take your clean data and put it into a pivot table and create a quick pivot chart. Little bonus round for you there. So I'm going to click in my table, I'm going to go to the insert ribbon, and again there's numerous different ways that you can create pivot tables. If you're fairly new to them, I would suggest using recommended pivot tables, because what this will do is Excel will look at your data and it will suggest to you the best ways to lay out your pivot table. So I'm going to select the top one and I'm going to click OK. And it opens up a new sheet for me, and my pivot table has been added just here. Now, this isn't a pivot tables training session. I don't know if you've attended my pivot tables training previously, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but the basic concept with pivot tables is that you can move the fields around to get your data to display in different ways. So currently I have my data displaying by branch and the sum of all of the values. So basically this is the total sales for each of the branches, and then I have my grand total at the bottom. If I wanted to display this in a slightly different way, I could do it by moving around the pivot table fields on the right hand side. So you can see down here in rows I have branch, which you can see my branches are in rows. My values are in the values area, but I could drag and drop branch to columns if I wanted to. And not a particularly nice format, I don't think, but you can see now it's listing my branch in column step, and I have underneath, and I could start adding more fields in if I wanted to. So rows, I now have my departments down the side, and I could bring branch back down to here to get it to display slightly differently, drag branch up, so on and so forth. That's the power of a pivot table, is the ability to be able to move fields around and really extract what you're looking for and really help you analyze your data. As I said, we're not going to go too much into this, but I will very quickly create a, let's make it a little bit simpler. I'm very quickly going to create a pivot chart. So again, I'm going to click in my data, and all the way over on the right hand side, you see I have a pivot chart option. And I'm just going to create a very quick column chart, like so. And the reason why I'm doing this is I'm going to show you, I'm going to go back to my store data, and I'm going to add some data into this table. And this is why I advise putting your data into tables. If I go to the bottom, most of you will know that for a lot of data, data doesn't stay static all the time. It's quite dynamic. So for example, sales figures here are probably going to change each month. So as the months go, I'm going to build up my sales. So that data is going to change. Now, if I've got lots of things hanging off of that data, such as pivot tables and pivot charts, I want these to update automatically when this data updates. So I'm just going to take some, I'm not sure how well this is going to work, but let's just drag, I'm going to select just the last part of this table, and I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to paste it into the bottom, and watch what happens when I paste. It essentially becomes part of this table. So the table automatically expands to accommodate the new data. So anything you add in will become part of that table. If I hadn't have put my data in a table, it wouldn't become part of that range. So when I went to my pivot table, because this is built off of this table data, it will now update correctly. Whereas if I hadn't put it in a table, I would have to go in and start modifying my cell ranges to select them. So all I would need to do now to get it to update is click in my pivot table and go to my pivot table tools, which are hiding underneath the webinar controls, which is quite annoying. There we go. And you see we have a refresh button. So all I would need to do to get all of this to update, and I don't know if you're going to be able to notice the change because it's quite small, but if I click refresh, oh, very slightly, I don't know if you saw Atlanta moved very slightly there, but now it's updated with that new data from here. So that is the #1 reason to put your data into a table. So easy to update everything afterwards by just clicking that refresh button. All right. That's a little added extra for you that I want to throw in before we go on to the next stage of cleaning data. Is everybody happy so far? How are we feeling about that? Lovely. Someone's put, please keep in mind that people can't see when you type into the webinar chat. I'm actually not typing anything into the webinar chat, so I don't tend to use that during the sessions, just mainly for you guys to communicate to me. Lovely. All right, fantastic. Let's move on to the next section. Now in this next section, and I'm actually going to just close this down. Yeah, let's close this one down. Don't save. Now, in this next part, we're going to get into a little bit more of those cleaning data using text functions. And again, these might be some that you've used before. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import a text file. So let me show you what I'm going to import first of all, so you have an idea. It's this one here. So it's a .txt file. Let's get rid of that. So this is basically just a very small sample of data. You might have a lot more data than this, but I just wanted to work on a very small sample. So we have 20 or so employee information there. So you can see here it's in a text file. We have the employee name, and then we have, I'm not sure what this is, possibly the date of their hire, but you can see it's in numerical form as opposed to a date in this first one. And then I'm not 100% sure what that is, could be their employee number, their department, and their job title. And you can see I have that going all the way down. And this is a text file. Maybe I've got this, extracted this from some kind of HR system or something like that. But what I want to do is I want to import this into Excel, and I want to get this into a nice format. So I want all the fields separated. So I want the first name in one column. I want the next name, the next item in another column, so on and so forth. And the important thing to note here is finding what the delimiter is. Now, when I say delimiter, what we mean by that is what is separating these pieces of information. And it could be different depending on what kind of data you're using, but in this data, you can see the delimiter is a semicolon. So in between each piece of information, I have a semicolon, which essentially separates those fields. And that's really important when it comes to separating up data. Okay, so bear that in mind, we're using a semicolon. So that's the data we're going to import. So let's do that. I'm going to close down the text file. I'm going to go to File. And I'm going to just open this text file. So I'm going to go to Browse. And I'm going to go to Desktop, Cleaning Data. And there is my text file. So I'm just going to open it in Excel. And what Excel will do is it will pick up that it's not an Excel file that I'm opening, it's a text file. And it's going to bring me the text import wizard, okay? This little wizard is fantastic. And this is what you would use if you had this situation. This is what you would use to do it all for you. So let me just show you how it works when you're using it correctly, because it works perfectly. So what we're saying here, it says choose the file type that best describes your data. So we've got delimited or fixed width, okay? And it's selected delimited. And what does that mean? Well, characters such as a comma or tab separate each field. So that's pretty much what we have. And you can see in the preview, we've got semicolons separating ours. So I'm going to leave it on delimited and I'm going to click next. Now it's asking me, what is your delimiter? So what is separating all of your fields? And it's giving me some of the most popular options, or if I have something completely different, I could choose other and put what that separator is in there, okay? Now, in this case, semicolon is what I want to select. So I'm going to select semicolon. And you can see automatically in the data preview, it's showing me how it's going to split that data up. And that looks absolutely perfect to me. That is what I would want. So I would click Finish. And it imports it in if we just resize these columns. And there we go. It's done it all in one step for us, which is perfect. That is what you would do, okay? Now we're going to go back and we're going to do it the difficult way, because I want to show you how to manually do this yourself so you can learn how to utilize text functions. Not because you would necessarily use them in this scenario, you would use this method I just showed you, but because these are really useful for many different aspects when you're trying to organize data or just use functions in Excel. So we're going to go back and do it again, but a slightly different way, the hard way. So let's do don't save. Let's open our file again, which is just there. And this time I'm going to say, okay, yes, delimited, but I'm not going to go through, I'm just going to click Finish. In fact, do I want to, yeah, I'm just going to click Finish. And what it's going to do, if I double click column A, it's basically imported my data, but it's not split it down, okay, because I haven't told it how to split it. So everything is in column A. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to use some fancy little useful functions to help us sort out this data and separate it up. So these are all really useful for you to know. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a blank row in the top here, because I always like to have a blank row because I might decide to add in some kind of heading or something else later on. I don't know why, it's just me. I never like to have my data kind of just like jammed in cell A1. I always like to have a little bit of a gap. I'm just going to make my column B slightly wider to accommodate what we're going to do next. All right, so we're going to split up this information, as I said, the hard way, but you're going to learn some useful functions along the way. Now, the first thing I want to do is in column B, I want to have just the name listed. So I want Juarez Jose, Abraham Johnny, Baker Sarah, just in column B. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use the find function. Equals find. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Hang on, let me come out there. I'm going to zoom in slightly because I know this is sometimes a bit hard to see. Okay, equals find. Open bracket. Okay, so the first thing, what we're going to do is we're going to say, I want you to find everything that comes before this first semicolon, okay? So I'm basically going to tell Excel, look for the semicolon, okay? So because I wanted to separate out what comes before that semicolon. So it's saying find text. So I'm going to say look for the semicolon, and that has to go in quote marks because it's text. And I want you to look for the semicolon in A2. And I'm going to close. Like so. So it's telling me that the semicolon is the 14th character in this text string. And I can then very easily copy that down. And another quick way of copying down, which I think is quite nice, if you don't want to double click, you can highlight all the way down and do Control D. And that will also automatically fill down. So what I've got now is a list of basically the position in the string where the semicolon is located. What I'm going to do now is, in order to separate this out, another thing I want to tell Excel is I want to know the total length of the characters in column A. And there's another little command which will tell you how many characters you have in a cell, and that's called the len command. So I'm going to type in len A2 and close. And I can do the same thing. I can double click or I can highlight and do Control D to copy down. So now I know that there are 38 characters in this string, 53, 51, and so on and so forth. Now these numbers are going to be useful to me in a moment when I'm trying to separate out these pieces of text. But again, just useful functions in general. So we have the position of the semicolon and we have the total length of the string. All right, I'll be back. Is everyone still there? Yes, yes. I'm sorry. Let's try and get through this last part before it happens again. All right. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so we're back. So what I want to do now in column D is I basically want to use these figures that I've got to help me separate out the name from the rest of this text. So what I want to have basically in column D is the name, and in column E, just everything else. Okay, so how are we going to utilize these two pieces of information? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the left command, and what that does, or that left function I should say, is it will count from the left side of the cell. Okay, so from this side of the cell it will count across. So I'm going to say equals left, oops, open bracket. And I want to count in cell. All right, so we're in the middle of this left function. So left, we want to count from the left of cell A2. And what we want to do is we want to say number of characters. So we want to do B2, so this is the position of that semicolon, okay? Now bear in mind that 14 is actually the semicolon, okay? Now I don't want to include that, so I want to say position 14 minus 1. We actually want position 13, which is that space, because I don't want to include the semicolon along with the name. And if I close my bracket, it gives me Juarez Jose, and I can copy all the way down like so. And there we go. And you can see here all the names are in uppercase. Again, you could have applied your proper command at the start if you wanted to. I didn't do that, you've seen that already, but you could apply that or upper or lower or whatever it is that you want to do. So then I want the rest of this in column E. So I'm going to widen my column slightly and we're going to do something slightly different. So we're going to say equals. This time we're going to say right, so this is going to count from the right. And the text we want to use is the text in cell A2. And this time I want to take the number of characters, so C2 minus up to the position of here. So it's basically going to count backwards or from the right all the way back to where we have this first semicolon. And that should give us everything else in that column, and we can copy down. Now you could carry on doing that same process to separate out each of these fields. As I said, this is a really, really long process, and you probably wouldn't do that. You would do that very quick step using the import wizard, which we did at the beginning. But as I said, these are really useful functions to know, not only for cleaning data, but also just generally when you're utilizing Excel. So I'm not going to bore you going through doing each one of these. What I am going to do is I'm going to bring up a spreadsheet where I've already done that stage, shall we say, where I've separated out all of the columns. Like so. So you can see here is our original, and then here is our data all split up into different columns. And if you look across the top, you'll see that I've got a lot of different rows hidden, okay? Now, this is something which you might want to do. If I widen out, you can see this is where like all of my working out is. So where I've got all my length and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. I don't want people to see that, so I can minimize those columns down, or I can hide them completely, okay? If you've never hidden a column before, you just right click and you have a hide option, and that will hide whatever column you select, and you have an unhide option as well. Unhide, let's just go back, it's going to be easier, like so. All right, so a couple of little techniques there for separating things out. So again, now I have my data here. There are a couple of changes I need to make to it. So again, if I look at it, I'm fairly happy with how those names are. And if I look at my start date, I'm not quite so happy with those. So again, I have a real mixture in here, and I can see automatically that start date and salary aren't quite correct. They have been set as text. Now, how do I know that those are text? What's the quickest way of being able to tell if something is text in a cell? Does anybody know? If you type into the chat panel, what's a really, really quick way of knowing if something is text? Yes, well done, Debbie. No, left justified, correct. When you see stuff that's left justified, like we've got down here, that means that essentially Excel thinks it's text in that cell, okay? Which isn't quite correct just here. What we want to have this is we want to have this formatted as dates. And the first thing I want to do is I want to tell Excel that these are actually values, they're not text. So there is a function that you can use for that as well. So if I highlight my values in the start date, if I go up to my formula bar, so you can see here I have the formula in here. That's that left formula that we did to work out how to separate this data. And what I'm going to add on the start is I'm going to add value. And make sure if you open a parentheses, you need to close them off. And you can see now it's moved it over to the right hand side. I've told Excel that this is a value, and now it's made all of those numbers consistently into numerical values. I had a real mishmash in there of values and sort of dates. Now they're all values. I can safely go in up to my number format and change them all to dates, and they're now formatted correctly. So that value command is a good one to know as well. If you have anything that's displaying a bit weird that needs to be converted to values, you can use that in there as well. I'm going to do the same for salary because I can see that these are left justified as well. So I'm going to highlight, and I'm just going to add to that formula value. Oops, don't want two brackets. And do I want any more brackets? No, I think we're good there. Like so. And I can copy down. And again, I can go in and I can change that to currency. And everything's looking a lot better in there. Now we've looked at the trim function. I would also advise on this data, aside from doing the additional steps of making these proper, changing the case, you could also run the trim function as well to clean up your data. So I would advise you to do that. And the spreadsheets that I'm going to send to you over the next couple of days, you can really go in there and you can practice all of these, okay? So I'm going to send you one that's completed and one that you can complete yourself. So you can really get a grip as to what you're doing with these functions. The last function I'm going to show you, because we are getting towards the end of the session and I don't want us to crash again, the last function I'm going to show you is the substitute function. And this is a great one if you need to switch out pieces of text. And again, it's not the simplest way of doing something. I'm going to show you both methods, but it is another function you should be aware of. So with the substitute function, what you might use that for is, you can see here we have various different positions that people, actually, sorry, in the department field, that's what I want, various different departments. And we have some in here which are abbreviated. So you can see here marketing has been abbreviated to MKTG. We also have R&D and admin. You know, these are all sort of shorter versions of the full name. And it might be that you want to change all of the MKTG to the word marketing. That is where you could use the substitute function. So I'm going to go into here, the top one here in Q2. I'm going to look at the formula that we've got, and I'm just going to say, okay, we're going to add substitute, and I can never spell this, there we go. Substitute, and I want what's in Q2, which is basically where this formula is, so that's fine. The old text, so I want you to look for MKTG, comma, and you can see now it's saying what's the new text, so I want you to replace it with marketing, like so. And do I need to close off a bracket? Yes, I do. All right, now I'm going to hit enter. Now it won't have made a difference to that one, but keep your eye on cell Q8, okay? As I copy down, you should see that change to marketing, which it does, okay? Now you could carry on doing that to substitute any of the others, so I could add more on the end here for admin, R&D, so on and so forth. This I wouldn't tend to use for long lists of data because it's quite time consuming having to type all of that in, but it is great just for sort of simple little things or small errors that you see. You can very easily use the substitute command. Again, another good command to know. The way that's probably going to be easier for you is just using a very simple find and replace. Okay, so again, I'm going to highlight this column. On the home ribbon, I'm going to go across to find and select. And I'm going to select replace, and I'm going to say find everything that says R&D and replace it with research and development, and I'm going to say replace all. What? Have I not typed that in right? Maybe there's no spaces. Why didn't you find anything? Maybe it's because I've highlighted. Let's try that again. It doesn't like that, does it? Have I not typed it in correctly? Oh, there we go. Okay, close. And now you see that we have research and development in there. And I could go through and do that for admin as well. That might be a lot quicker for you to do it, but it is also good to know that substitute function as well. All right, thank you so much for bearing with me. Those are a few of the techniques. There is so much on cleaning data, and I would advise that you do Google cleaning data. I was having a look at it earlier today, and there's so much on there. We've covered a lot of the main things. So a lot of the top 10 ways of cleaning data would be things like we've covered, such as utilizing a lot of these text functions to clean up your data, change the case, removing blank rows, all of those kinds of things. So definitely check it out online. And as I said, have a little practice with it yourself. I know that some of those things are probably quite difficult to get your head around. When we were formatting this and we were doing the -1, you know, in relation to the semicolon, that's quite hard to understand. I think sometimes you need to go through it a little bit slower, which is why when you get the recording, you're probably going to understand it a little bit more. So I do advise you to kind of go through it yourself, and we will provide you with those exercises. All right, let me just go back into my slides and we will switch to questions. Yay, all right. So let me just pull up the chat panel and let me see what's scrolling through. Just be aware there's so many questions. Someone's put, you can do text to columns and use the comma as your delimiter. Yes, you can. So there is a text to columns option in Excel as well, which does pretty much the same thing. So yes, that is an alternative as well. Let me see, let me scroll up. I have, Kashida's put, I have a question. I have spreadsheets that I need to clean, but none of the functions work. Any idea why? I have no idea without seeing the spreadsheet. I mean, when you say they don't work, is it that you're typing them in and nothing's happening, or what? I would have to look a little bit closer into that one, I think, Kashida. Let's have a look. How do we separate first name and last name? You could do it the same way as I've showed you, and just specify what the delimiter is. So if for example, if you were using my name and it had Ashby, comma, Deborah in one cell, you could split it up and the comma would be the delimiter. So you could do it that way as well. Just scrolling up, let's see. Tim has put, what if only some of your dates were text and others were already numbers? I would still run that value command just to make sure. I mean, if they're already numbers, it's not going to do any harm to run the value command. So I would still do it. Scrolling up, scrolling up. Someone's put, thank you, but I think it's a bit too advanced for me. Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry. I know we tried to keep most of them fairly basic. The last couple of weeks, we've done a few more advanced functions in there, but yeah, I'd advise you to go through the webinar, and it's not particularly advanced stuff, but I can understand why you might think that is the case. Scrolling down, let's see. I tried to use value and it says equals value B2 in the cell. It shouldn't do that if you're typing in a formula, Kashida. That's very odd. If you're seeing that text, I would ask you to check what that cell that you're typing into is formatted as, if you're seeing that displayed on the screen. That's a little bit odd. You don't have show formulas on, do you, where you can see the formula as opposed to the result? Let's have a look. Is a way to take first name, last name, and break them into 2 columns. Yes, so that is, let me go back to here, because we've had a couple of questions on that. So this here, so where you've got first name and last name, or last name, first name, doesn't really matter. Again, it just depends what the delimiter is. So you can use exactly the same method. So you could, and you would just say that you would just find the delimiter. So if you remember initially, we did an equals find, and initially we were searching for the semicolon, but for this one, I would just ask it to search for the comma in here, and I would go through it that way, and then you pretty much continue on. So it's telling me, and then I would do the length, and I would carry on going through that process. So you can do it exactly the same way. The techniques I've showed you can be applied to anything if there is a delimiter. Lovely. All right, I think we're just about time's up. I know I didn't get to all of your questions. I never do. I'm going to give you my contact information. So hang on. Una momento. Let me pull it up. Here we go. All right, so that is my email address. If any of you would like to get in touch with me, always welcome. And as hopefully most of you know, we launched our YouTube channel a couple of weeks ago, and we are uploading a lot of videos onto there, including all of our recorded webinars. So if you need to go back and review, you'll find all of our webinars are on YouTube. So if you want to subscribe to Excel with Business, or EWB promos as we're on YouTube as, then please feel free. In fact, I might just pop that in the, oops, I don't think it's going to let me. I'm going to pop this piece of text. Oh God, it's all gone wrong. It's all gone wrong. Here we go. I'm going to pop this into the chat panel for you. There you go. So you can favorite that, save it, do what you like with it. Yes, so all of our webinars are uploaded onto there. Also, as you know, all webinar participants will receive a copy of the recording. Now, that used to be the day after. We're now saying 2 days, because now that we're uploading to YouTube, it takes YouTube about 9 hours to upload our video, which normally means we miss the cutoff point to send it out tomorrow night. So within 48 hours, you will receive a link to the recording on YouTube and also the practice files as well. So that's when to expect those. And the final point I'd like to mention is I know that a lot of you do follow me on LinkedIn. I have had a few questions and comments because I put something on LinkedIn yesterday which seemed to scare people a little bit. So I just wanted to let you know, I work for Filtered and Excel with Business, and at the end of February I'm actually switching to freelancing. So a lot of people were concerned that these webinars would be stopping, but I just wanted to say, fear not, I will still be working, doing these webinars on behalf of Filtered and Excel with Business going forward. I'll just be a freelancer as opposed to actually working full-time here. So just wanted to mention that for those of you that had sent me messages and commented. All right, guys, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. I'm so sorry about the interruptions. Hopefully next time will be a lot better. I don't know what's going on today. It's been happening all day. So thank you so much for your patience, and I will speak to you next time. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit subscribe and the bell icon to keep up to date with our latest content. Happy learning!